Welcome to our study of Heart Treasure of the Enlightened, the root text by Sa Paltru Rinpoche, with a commentary by Kyabje Dorje Chang, Dilgu Khenze Rinpoche. So kindly generate the intention to apply this for the sake of ultimately establishing all sentient beings at the level of perfect enlightenment. Hello. So I'm assuming the sound and everything is good. Okay. So last time we had a few issues with the transmission, but right now we're running off the fastest network that I have here, so let's hope it works okay. So first we invoke our two teachers. Actually, last time I made a mistake. I said the second one is invoking Jameen Khyentse Wangpo. Of course, it's not. It's invoking Dilku Khyentse Rinpoche. So the first is invoking and supplicating Paltru Rinpoche, and the second one, Dilku Khyentse Rinpoche. Outwardly, you are the Bodhisattva Shantideva. Inwardly, you are Shauraripa, Lord of Siddhas. Secretly, you are truly noble Avalokiteshvara, dispeller of pain. I supplicate you, Jigme Chige Wombo. Embodiment of the twofold wisdom of all the Buddhas, you are Manjushri, play of wisdom's tenderness. Great chariot of the Buddha's teaching, king of knowledge. I supplicate you, Pema Dongwa Klingba. So, within the second part, we have looked at the path of the sutras. We're presently in the path of the tantras. Last time we looked at the development stage practice and the yoga of body, speech, and mind, which is the basic, you could say, aspects of the development stage practice. And now we're looking at the completion stage. And the completion stage is where we let go of any reference point whatsoever. We would say that if we have the development stage practice and all the visualizations and so forth, without the completion stage, there's a risk that we could fall into what we call the extreme of eternalism, that we could have some ultimate reference point. And this, of course, would would defy all the entire nature of the path, which is training ourselves in letting go of any reference points whatsoever, the middle way. But at the same time, we need the development stage because it is the skillful means that enables us to bring the experience of our body, speech, and mind onto the path and essentially connect it with the ultimate nature. So within the development stage practice, we very much operate with the notion of deity as the unity of appearance and emptiness. In the completion stage practice, we actually let go of any reference point whatsoever. Paltru Rinpoche says, whatever appears is delusion and has no true existence. Samsara and nirvana are just thoughts and nothing more. If you can liberate thoughts as they arise, that includes all stages of the path. Applying the essential instruction for liberating thoughts, recite the 6-syllable mantra. So as we'll see here, we also, of course, we do unite somewhat the practice of development stage practice and the completion stage practice, in that we're still referring somewhat to practices that do engage certainly the body and speech, in terms of, while we are practicing engaging the practice of no reference point, still that doesn't prevent us from chanting the mantra. So we have that continual red thread. Anyway, so we have these two stages of yoga, and we've completed the first, the development stage. The completion stage practice, like I was saying, is the non-conceptual recognition of the nature of mind. So we could approach this in terms of dissolving the development stage practice, the reference point of the deity, mantra. However, we could also approach this in terms of just the recognizing the actual nature of mind itself, simply leaving mind in its natural condition without the overlay of confusion. And in doing that, we no longer are asserting any solidity neither to self nor phenomena, and as such, this we would refer to this as a condition of no delusion. Khyentse Rinpoche quotes the Samadhi Raj Sutra, where it says we should understand that in the unborn ground, none of all the many things we perceive, our bodies, houses, carts, and so forth, has any true existence. So this is the scope of the vision of the middle way, the prajna paramita, and so forth. Whenever we arrive at this vipassana of seeing the nature of ultimate truth, then we understand that there's nothing that ever comes into existence. We would say that phenomena are unborn. They actually never, because they're a web of conditions, there's never ever a moment where, just like a seed doesn't all of a sudden stagnate in being a seed, or a sprout stagnates in being a sprout. Everything is just appearing on the basis of causes and conditions, a web of relationships, if you like. So we'd say nothing comes into being, nothing truly exists, and nothing truly ceases. We have actually never seen anything come into existence. We've never seen anything abide as existing, and we have never seen anything cease to exist. If we analyze our reality, it is actually like that. Of course, we conventionally, yes, we talked about we have birthdays and and so forth, all of these things, yes, relatively yes. But in terms of the actual nature, and that is what we're referring to here, we say phenomena is free from coming, existing, or ceasing. To no longer be held by these reference points and to no longer be grasping at any phenomena whatsoever, we settle into a confidence that is not conditioned in any way. And we would say that it's on the basis of us analyzing reality that we begin to see this empty nature. Doesn't mean that there's nothing there as such, but we begin to see there's nothing we can grasp. We would say certainty in this empty nature is the ultimate kind of completion stage practice. So relatively we abide by the perceptions, whatever we see, and we'll see a lot about this. Yet we also need to continually understand that there's nothing about these perceptions, these appearances, that has any ultimate reality. And being comfortable in that, knowing this, is the ultimate completion stage practice. So the truth is that we think what does not have existence, that it has existence, that what doesn't have solidity, it has solidity, and so forth. So we're a bit naive. It's not that we're there's nothing wrong in that we notice that there's phenomena, but it's the fact that we attribute solidity and existence to what in fact has no existence. That where our mistake lies. And this is where we can begin to analyze. We would basically say anytime we scrutinize something, there's nothing that can stand, what is it again we say, can stand up to scrutiny. There's nothing that actually we could find if we investigate that has any ultimate reality. And this is where we, in the Madhyamika, we have this practice of looking at phenomena, the external phenomena. Can we find anything that has ultimate existence there? Cannot. If we look at the nature of ourself, what we think of as me, skandhas, the ayatanas, the experiences of our identity, cannot find anything that is absolute. We can see a web of relations and conditioning, but to think that something has existence, that we see with the Madhyamaka reasoning, this comes undone. So when we have that, when we apply this Madhyamaka freedom, we begin to become able to settle without this insecurity of attempting to fixate what cannot be held and operating with a deluded subject that attempts to do this. We can see in our world on a very ordinary level how everything is continually changing, and we can also see, as Khyentse Rinpoche says, the laughter of today becomes the tears of tomorrow. So all of these experiences in terms of our relationship with the ever-changing world around us, ever based on conditions, is that our likes and dislikes continually are fluctuating. We have various shifting emotions. The sage, who is no longer held by this naive assumption about what is perceived, they see the world as apparent, yet also they know that it's not something that can be grasped, just like we know we can't grasp a rainbow. And so we would say the enlightened beings see the world as no more real than a mirage. And yet, us ordinary persons, we are a bit naive, childish, and so we're continually excited by certain things and continually despondent about other things. And it's a bit like a restless monkey that's sort of all the time sort of going from one thing to the other. Khyentse Rinpoche is saying we should be, and we very often have this instruction in the tradition of meditation instructions, where we should be like a senior person that's watching children playing. You know, the children take their game very serious, but a mature adult, they would see that actually there's nothing real about these various perceptions, and so the adult would know that you know, even though, as one of the kids say, "Bang, you're dead," or you know, something like the sandcastle gets kicked over and so forth. There's no great tragedy taking place, and this is where the senior person has this wider perspective. You could say this sense of humor that the children who are caught up in their games lack. Now, this we need to apply. And if we're ever caught in our perception seriously, even if we might say, "Oh, I've been practicing Buddhism for so long," you know, unless we actually apply this in every micro moment of our existence, it doesn't really sink deep into us. And so we might say, "Oh yeah, I've been a member of the Buddhist church for a very long time. I'm a card-carrying Buddhist since forever." We might have that sort of sense of entitlement that, hey, this shouldn't be happening to me. I shouldn't have unfortunate circumstances like that. And nevertheless, of course, because of our karma, then all sorts of things happen in our lives that can't be stopped. And if we think that we're sort of entitled to some sort of a benevolent treatment by the universe just from the fact that we practice for a long time, we begin to doubt the value of the teaching. And so this is where Khyentse Rinpoche says that we need to apply these teachings, and it's on the basis of applying these teachings that we then begin to progress from day to day. Actually, yeah, Paul Rinpoche, he makes a point, actually. He says if we don't practice, then we could be sitting in retreat for years, nothing happens. But if we actually apply the practice, we would actually notice progress from day to day. Khyentse Rinpoche says, mind is what creates both samsara and nirvana. Yet, there's nothing much to it. It is just thoughts. Once you recognize thoughts as void, the mind will no longer have the power to deceive you. But as long as you take your deluded thoughts as real, they will continue to torment you mercilessly, as they have been doing throughout countless past lives. To gain control over the mind, you need to be aware of what to do and what to avoid. And you also need to be very alert and vigilant, constantly examining your thoughts, words, and actions. And he also says, when you recognize the void nature of the mind, grasping falls away, and you're no longer taken in by your deluded thoughts. When a bodhisattva helps others, he has no idea of getting something in return or being praised for his or her generosity. He has no attachment whatsoever to his virtue. This is absolute Chenrezig, compassion and voidness itself. So this nature that is Chenrezig, it is naturally imbued with compassion. It has nothing graspable about it. We would say it's emptiness, it's voidness, yet it is endowed with a heart of compassion. So then Paul Rinpoche writes, your own mind, aware and void inseparably, is Dharmakaya. Leave everything as it is, in fundamental simplicity, and clarity will arise by itself. Only by doing nothing will you do all there is to be done. Leaving everything in naked void awareness, recite the 6-syllable mantra. So this ultimate mind is not something that that's going to come down from the sky. Once Kinzermaja, he was joking with me, and he said to me, open your mouth. And so I opened my mouth, and he says, sometimes it's as if you think that I can just put enlightenment into your mouth like that. So we sometimes have this naive idea that enlightenment is going to come from somewhere else. But it's actually this mind that we're sitting with right now, the mind that I'm sitting with as I'm speaking, the mind that you're sitting with as you're listening. This is here that we will find the ultimate nature. So this is where we need to distinguish between, you could say, the layers of confusion and the wisdom that is the heart of this nature. And that's where we need to distinguish what we sometimes talk about, the distinction between consciousness and wisdom. Sometimes we talk about the distinction between mind and wisdom. But we need to distinguish between this ordinary confused mind and wisdom, the nature of mind itself. And that nature of mind itself is egoless. It has no sense of I and special. It's the mind that grasps, that begins to think in terms of the nature, the special nature, the Rigpa, the this, the that, and the other, and grasping at it. The nature of mind itself is unconditioned by any such dualistic notions. So a piece of instruction that comes from the Buddha is that we should recognize like a lion, not as a dog. So with the lion, it's where we look at the nature of mind itself. We look at the looker. With the dog approach, we're concerned with what's in the mind. We're concerned with what feelings we have, what thoughts we have, all of that arises, all of these shifting things. And we're very often, specifically in the sort of the tradition of modern psychology, there's this notion of working with the narrative, working with the content of the mind, working with what's the mind. And there's no sense of the unconditional void nature of the ultimate nature of mind. So in that sense, there's very, very different approach between psychology and what we're doing here. There was somebody who once said, psychology, it's a bit like working with rearranging the furniture, whereas the approach of wisdom is opening the door. This might sound glib and a little bit like a cliche, but it is quite significant in terms of how we're approaching this. And of course, this is not a question of dismissing one for the other. It's just understanding that they operate with different method and have a very different approach. Kinzermaja says, you can throw as many sticks as you like at a dog, but at a lion only one. When you're completely barraged with thoughts, chasing after each one in turn with its antidote is an endless task. This is like the dog. It is better, like the lion, to look for the source of those thoughts, void awareness, on whose surface thoughts move like ripple on the surface of a lake, but whose depth is the unchanging state of utter simplicity. Resting in the unwavering continuity of that state, recite the 6-syllable mantra. So we will say whenever we throw sticks at a dog, and how many sticks we might throw a number of sticks at a dog, and the dog would be barking at the sticks. If we throw one stick at a lion, it doesn't look at the stick, it turns around and looks, who threw that? So similarly, going straight to the heart of the matter is the approach of the lion. One-pointedness. Let stillness cut the momentum of moving thoughts. Within movement, see the very nature of stillness. Where stillness and movement are one, maintain the natural mind. In the experience of one-pointedness, recite the 6-syllable mantra. So now we're looking at the 4 yogas, and this is general, of course, for Mantrayana, and sometimes also very much prominent in the teachings of Mahamudra. But here we to a large extent operate with an understanding of deity and wisdom as inseparable. And we operate with this notion of what we call the unity of development and completion. We don't really see them as 2 different things. Now, when we look at the mind, it's sometimes still, sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's agitated, it's movement. But whatever it is, both conditions are mind. And basic to both of them, there's a knower that would know whether the mind is still or whether it's agitated. So we say thoughts arise naturally. That's going to be happening. Whether the mind is still, whether it's moving, whatever's happening in the mind, the nature of mind is such that it gives rise to thoughts, to perceptions, and so forth. Now, if we're aware of the thoughts, they don't get a grip on us. If we're just aware, we just look at the thoughts without unconsciously getting absorbed by them, they dissolve. This takes some proficiency in terms of actual experience. This is where to have a foundation with shamatha and vipassana is quite helpful. Sometimes we might get these instructions and we say, hey, it's not dissolving. These thoughts, they're still there. So that's where some proficiency and some familiarity with meditation is quite helpful. We will have more confidence in that instruction. And yet, at the same time, we also know there's a big difference between being aware that a thought is arising and being attentive to that, seeing that it doesn't begin to, you could say, carry us away, and being completely absorbed and just completely indulged, overwhelmed by thoughts and being controlled by them. And so we know, even though we're not meditators, then we know that this is a fact, whether or not we're carried away by thoughts. So here it applies then, if we're aware of the thoughts, they dissolve. If we're not aware of them, they grow and control us. These narratives, we hold on to them, they become part of us, and they have a big grip on us. The point here is that we do not need to stop thoughts. It's not like, if we're meditating and we have less thoughts, that's better. That's not really it. And there's certainly not the notion like, I don't want to have these thoughts. The point is not that we're trying to stop thoughts, but we're trying to liberate them in the sense that they might arise and yet we don't necessarily get entangled by them. So we would say when they dissolve, we refer to this as them being liberated. Thoughts arise and yet they go, just like clouds in space, just like the ripples on the surface of the ocean doesn't disturb the depth of the ocean. And the way to do this is, effectively to do this, is to remain in simplicity. The practice of not subscribing to these various, what we call conceptual constructs. Khyentse Rinpoche says, when you no longer perpetuate the movement of thoughts, they dissolve by themselves without leaving any trace. When you no longer spoil the state of stillness with mental fabrications, you can maintain the natural serenity of mind without any effort. Left to themselves, thoughts constitute what we call a chain of delusion. They seem so solid. We have a solid sense of person, of our character, and all driven by this continual subscription to what arises in our mind. We refer to this as the chain of delusion. But yet, if we look at it, if we begin to scrutinize this, and this is where we analyze this, we would see it is like a river that indeed we refer to it, we label it the river this and that, the Charles River, the, I don't know, the Potomac, the Mississippi, the, the Wilson River, and yet there's no constancy in this. It's not the same water at all. There's no essential constancy, and yet, of course, there's, you could say, a web of conditions that are there to give the impression of a river, and a impression of a continuity, but it's just conditions. And this is where, for us to extract ourselves of this mistake where we attribute solidity, this is where Madhyamika reasoning, which is this analysis that enables us to see for ourselves that there is no absolute reality to our thoughts. Khyentse Rinpoche describes how, if we look at the mind, past thoughts, you can say they are very much what has created the present thoughts, and yet past thoughts, they're not existent, they're not there. And future thoughts, they're not there either, right now. Look, present thoughts, can we find anything to grasp about the present thoughts? Nothing whatsoever. Do we say that the past is part of the present? Well, that's kind of impossible, because that would mean that there's some sort of like, that the past is present right now. Never happened, never will happen. Similar with the future thoughts. Then the future is not here right now. So this reasoning, as unfamiliar as it might seem, this enables us to begin to sort of crack open some of the assumptions we have about these thoughts as being real. We apply this kind of analysis both to the mind and also to the objective reality. Presently, we're mainly, and in this particular yoga, the yoga of one-pointedness, we're mainly just looking at the thoughts. Now, the thing is, unless we continually apply this scrutiny, unless we sustain this insight, then the thoughts and emotions, they'll continue to dominate us. That's when, even though we might carry little cards and say, I've been a Buddhist for a very long time, it won't help. Thoughts and emotions, they will continue to dominate us. If we, for example, look at something like anger, this destroys, as we know, our good qualities. Yet again, if we look, anger is no more than thoughts. With awareness, if we're onto the mind, then anger doesn't have the capacity to control us. But if we're not, then yes, it does. If we don't have awareness, it takes control. So recognizing the nature of thoughts, the chain of delusion will cease. This is what we're proposing here. And that's where the practice of tranquility, shamatha, shine, calm abiding, it provides then the foundation for us to actually experience this. Without this foundation, we might have some thoughts about these things, but it doesn't really take ground. But once we have that, then we can actually have experience how awareness then liberates these thoughts. Khyentse Rinpoche says, if the foundation tranquility is unsound, insight will be unsound too. Insight here meaning vipassana. So if the foundation tranquility is unsound, insight will be unstable too. And your deluded thoughts will be difficult to control. It's therefore essential to develop the yoga of one-pointedness, remaining in unwavering awareness. Your story about the light being put in your mouth reminds me of a friend who was asked by his guru, holding a lit match, to open his mouth, and then placed it in, for the friend had so much trust. But in the end, had his mouth burnt. Yeah, Khyentse Rinpoche, he was just like, he was holding some sort of, a pill or something like that. So yes, yeah. Okay. Actually in some empowerments, you're actually given a little, given a little lamp to swallow. I've done it a few times. Actually, you don't get burnt, but you actually do swallow this little lamp. Anyway. Okay. So then the next one. Yeah. Simplicity. By examining relative truth, establish absolute truth. Within absolute truth, see how relative truth arises. Where the two truths are inseparable, beyond intellect, is the state of simplicity. In the view, free of all elaboration, recite the 6-syllable mantra. So, as far as relative truth goes, we analyze it. And so that's where we discover absolute truth. We look at the phenomenal world and we see it each in our own particular way. This is our experience conventionally. But if we look at it, then we might break it down. We might say, oh yeah, well, all the phenomenal world is made up of particles. We've had various theories that sort of have been one replacing the other. First we had atoms, then we had subatomic sort of particles and so forth. And these theories have been replacing each other. And yet, that's only on a conventional level. We could, in some way, we could be fine. Whatever science comes up with is fine. But we would always say that ultimately these particles are constructed by the observer. They don't have any reality from their own side. And this same applies to moments of consciousness also, which only has a reality from the point of view of us objectifying it. However subtle this nature is, we look before at the moments of consciousness, no matter how brief that moment is, it still operates with the notion of the 3 times, past, present, and future, in which there is actually, we would say, there's no continuity. We would say, just like there's a continuity in the sense of a seed becoming a sprout, becoming a plant, yes, that's conventional truth, but absolutely, there is no essence that is unchanging. That's the point. And when we see that, that is something that comes about when we analyze. You see, phenomenal, ordinary, conventional truth, yes, it's there. But when we begin to analyze, then nothing withstands actually that. Nothing stands up to scrutiny. There's nothing we can find that exists in the absolute sense. So we call this the reasoning of absolute analysis. And that is what we use in the middle way. Not from the point of view of developing a new philosophy, but just seeing that the assumptions we have about reality don't hold up. That's the point about the Madhyamika, the middle way, and so forth. It's just Nagarjuna and the Buddha, they want to free us. So recognizing this absence of any true existence is absolute truth. You might say, hey, then you're talking about a truth. Well, all we're saying here really is that that's actually, we would say that we distinguish between what we call the middle way of words and the actual middle way. And also we're going to talk about this somewhat. The moment that we use the methodology of Madhyamika reason, yes, that's true. That is just the middle way of words. But what we're pointing to, that's then the middle way, that is the actual middle way. And sure, that is beyond language and any such. But nevertheless, the freedom from these conceptual constructs, very valuable. This is what leads us to realization, freedom. Khyentse Rinpoche says, this is the natural state of mind, untouched by any obscuration, meaning the absolute truth, in which all phenomena are seen as the Buddhas see them, as dreams or magical illusions. Here, thoughts do not give rise to negative emotions or the accumulation of karma. Favorable circumstances engender neither pride nor attachment, and adverse circumstances are quickly transformed into the path of enlightenment. For example, an encounter with someone who irritates you, instead of causing great anger, helps you to generate compassion and becomes a chance to recognize the absolute truth, which is inseparable from bodhicitta. So for the sage that practices with this vision, any circumstances is something that continually enhances realization in bodhicitta. As long as we believe in relative phenomena as solid, we won't realize absolute truth. We stumble because we're objectifying, we're rigid, we are stuck within a narrow condition of mind where we refer to this as obscurations, these cognitive obscurations, and also emotional obscurations. They're based on this assumption that phenomena have absolute truth, absolute solidity. Once there is realization of absolute truth, there's no attachment or aversion. So at that point, we're no longer filtering the world. We're no longer imposing censorship on our reality. Reality is there, but yet we know it doesn't have any ultimate essence. That's where we realize then the unity of appearance and emptiness. This is that phenomena appear and yet they have no truth about them. That lack of being anything there doesn't prevent that there is appearance. So we say this is a unity, just like a rainbow. So we would say this insight is simplicity or freedom from conceptual constructs. So if we're talking meditation instruction, we usually translate into English this as simplicity. And if we're talking philosophy, we make a point about how this is freedom from any conceptual reference points or conceptual constructs. The Tibetan is Chodrel, and the Sanskrit is Nishprapancha, if you're interested in these things. The two truths, thus we have seen this absolute truth of emptiness and this relative truth of conventional appearances. They're not separate. They are the appearing yet empty aspects of the natural state. So it's not as if those who experience a natural state, they don't see anything, and as if they're cut off and stuck in some empty space or something like that. And yet they're not held by this natural state. They're not held by these appearing aspects. So this we call the view of the unity of appearance and emptiness. So when we first developed this understanding, and this is where we would say, yes, we understand absolute truth. Yes, this is valuable. This we call categorized absolute sometimes. The word is not used in here, but Khyentse Rinpoche talks about it in terms of we could see there's smoke, and that's where we can use the Madhyamika of reasoning to then sort of follow that, and it enables us actually to arrive at then the actual source, the fire, and that is compared with the actual experience of absolute truth then. So when it is fully realized, this we call the uncategorized absolute. It's no longer conceptual, if you like. So from appearance, cut away the clinging of mind. From mind, demolish the layer of fictitious appearances. Where mind and appearances are one in infinite openness, in the realization of one taste, recite the 6-syllable mantra. So our perceptions, what we then have of an apparently objective phenomena, are constructed by the mind. Khyentse Rinpoche says, when your organs of sense encounter an object, the only part the object itself plays is to initiate the process of perception in your consciousness. From then on, as your mind reacts to the object, influenced by your accumulated habits and past experiences, the whole process is entirely subjective. This, interestingly, also in Western epistemology, we recognize that actually we're not seeing the We're not seeing clearly the object, we're seeing our version of the object. So we would say whatever we're perceiving in terms of the phenomenal world, the objective realm and so forth, is created by this basically what we call karmic projection. What we've sort of built up in terms of our phenomena is what we're experiencing. So there is, you could say, the field, but this field is then experienced through our particular optics. It's entirely subjective. Khyentse Rinpoche goes on to say, so when your mind is full of anger, the whole world seems to be a hell realm. When your mind is peaceful, free from any clinging or fixation, and whatever you do is in accordance with the teachings, you experience everything as primordially pure. While a Buddha sees the hells as a paradise, deluded beings sees a paradise as the hells. So the way that we are perceiving the phenomenal world is entirely contingent on, dependent on our mind. We project our delusion onto the world, just like a person with a liver disorder projects the color yellow. So somebody who has jaundice will be seeing the white objects as yellow. Objects aren't yellow, but we're projecting like that. And the mind then clinging to these perceptions. So the way that we then think of the world and project onto it is then also the basis for our likes and dislikes. We react to it. So in that way, we have this emotional involvement in the perceptions, and that's what creates these kleshas, the toxic states of mind that perpetuate this self-centering and the sense of ego. And once that takes hold of us and we then act on them, these then become part of our patterning. And this is what we call karma. So these two, on the basis of the basic ignorance, then we have kleshas and karma. This is what drives samsara. So this is where not allowing this proliferation of delusion, this chain of delusion, this is where insight into the nature of things cuts through. This is the sword of prajna. Manjushri holding the sword. That's where this insight then cuts through the web of confusion. And that's where then when we begin to see that the way that we impute good, bad, and so forth has nothing to do with reality whatsoever, and we begin to settle into an equality or a one taste, a single flavor, and so forth, this is where then this fixation that we ordinarily operate with, it collapses. Khyentse Rinpoche says, good and bad, pure and impure, lose their compelling flavors and melt into one taste. You will reach the realization of Jetsun Milarepa, making no distinction between iron and gold. When Gampopa offered him gold and tea, Milarepa said, I am an old man with no need for gold and no stove to boil tea. So Rinpoche says, resting in this view, recite the 6-syllable mantra. And then the final of the 4 yogas. The first yoga, by the way, and I should have outlined this, but the first yoga is very much about looking at the subject, the mind, and the need for stilling the mind. The second is more about the vipassana that sees the empty nature of phenomena. And the third one taste, is more about understanding how the projections and so forth that appear to the mind, they don't exist in terms of actual good and bad and so forth. And that's where the third yoga is this one flavor that brings delusion to collapse. Now the last, and you could say the ultimate of these yogas, is non-meditation. So in there, Paltrimja writes, in the nature of mind, the simplicity of void awareness, everything is freed. Thoughts, the spontaneous creativity of awareness, are purified in their own sphere. Mind and awareness are one in the single essence. In the non-meditation of Dharmakaya, recite the 6-syllable mantra. So we would say this original natural state of mind, the nature of mind, in this condition, then everything is freed. We would say it's like the sun, where the display of the rays is inseparable from the sun itself. And similarly, also our primordial awareness is like the sun. And there's the display of thoughts that arise. And yet it's not anything else. So not making the mistake of objectifying the manifestation, then we settle into this condition of non-duality. And that's where everything is freed. If we have this, then delusion, with this kind of realization, and you could say initially we have an understanding, we begin to have some experience, and then gradually it becomes something that really takes hold of us, which we call realization. When we have this, then delusion vanishes like clouds dissolving in the sky. So simply by this non-doing, this unravels all confusion. Such a mind is free from the delusions of birth, existence, and cessation. So like we looked at before, this idea, this mistaken assumption that phenomena come into existence, that they're there for a while and they cease, in absolute truth, doesn't take place. So while the appearance of birth, existence, and cessation is there, the mind that realizes this, the nature, the absolute nature, is not held by this appearance. And so there's no delusion. There's no getting caught in this kind of delusion that they have solidity. Khyentse Rinpoche says, when you examine the still mind, the moving mind, and the mind that can recognize stillness and movement, however long you search for mind, you will find nothing but voidness. Mind has no form, no color, and no substance. This is the void aspect of the mind. Yet the mind can know things and perceive an infinite variety of phenomena. This is the clarity aspect of the mind. The inseparability of these two aspects, voidness and clarity, is the primordial continuous mind. In Tibetan, Nyugma. So this condition that is not deluded, it has these two aspects. It's intangible, ungraspable. There's nothing about it that can be held whatsoever, and yet it possesses a knowing. It possesses a capacity to manifest. Someone said that the sound is gone. I'm not sure. Has anybody experienced that? Yeah, no, I don't think so. This would have been in the case of the individual. Yeah, sound is okay. Yeah, like I said last time, I get notices if this happens. Yeah, okay, good. This recognition remedies the obscurations of mind. So this is what we're doing on the path. Of course, we practice the path in all its various aspects, but this is what we're heading towards. And this recognition is then this vipassana, this insight, and whatever we choose to call it, this gradual expanding our mind, this through the instructions that we're receiving here and the application of these instructions, this process of recognition remedies then what holds the mind back, the obstructions or the obscurations of the mind. And this enables the potential, the natural condition of the mind to manifest in its full extent. This practice, this kind of practice, like we're talking here, non-meditation, this doesn't have any distinction between meditation and post-meditation. So we would see great yogis, yes, of course, they engage in meditation, and yet when they arise from meditation, then there's not really any difference. There might be differences in terms of certain perceptions and degrees of seeing the empty nature of perceptions, and yet the actual core of this is unchanging. There's no distinction as far as the wisdom itself goes between meditation and post-meditation. Khyentse Rinpoche says, to summarize, The yoga of one-pointedness emphasizes, so this is going through the 4 yogas. So the yoga of one-pointedness emphasizes taming the mind, and that of simplicity, second, establishes insight. These two are united in the experience of one taste, and when this experience becomes unshakable, it is the yoga of non-meditation. The 4 yogas of the Mantrayana correspond to the 5 paths of the sutra system. It is therefore important to keep the view, meditation, and action of both the sutras and tantras together. All the different levels of teaching have but one goal: to cut through the obscuring emotions, so they are in perfect agreement with each other. So we sometimes see the path explained in terms of the 5 paths, the 10 levels, and sometimes we explain it in terms of these 4 yogas, sometimes the four levels of Vichitaras and so forth. But all of these, they really just are just various perspectives or various ways of going at the same process, which is the practice that we're doing, which is cutting through the obscuring emotions. So there's no conflict between these different labels and different ways of classifying the path. Also, Khyentse Rinpoche says, never forget that the main point is not whether our practice belongs to the sutras or tantras, or whether it is of this or that level, but that it serves as an effective antidote to attachment and the obscuring emotions. And that is where we can see people who practice what we might think is an inferior path, being completely superior in terms of just their flexibility, their kindness, and all sorts of qualities that manifest. And you might have people who claim to be practicing all sorts of advanced yogas and systems, and yet still rather confused. So it's about the medicine working for us, not about whether that there's one medicine that is the better medicine or not. It's how we apply it. I read this and just think about how deluded we are. We get so entangled with everything and do not see its reality. I aspire to one day have the experience of absolute truth. Well, thank you very much. You are making Paltru Rinpoche and Dilgo Khyentse Rinpoche very happy, because of course the first step is for us to see our delusion, and already here that prompts that we're going to be looking into it. And what we wish is exactly that this should be a means for aspiring to experiencing and realizing ultimate truth. So, transformation of the senses, emotions, and aggregates, the six sense objects. So here, the view of deity, mantra, and wisdom, as Khyentse Rinpoche describes, this is really what we take with us in terms of what we're doing with all the various Vajrayana or mantra paths. We're experiencing all perceptions and all our emotions and all the sense. I'm here referring to sense of beings in terms of the aggregates, the 5 aggregates. These are all seen as a mandala. So when we apply this view of deity, mantra, and wisdom, this is seeing everything in terms of a mandala. Khyentse Rinpoche says, of all the countless teachings on many levels that make up the path of secret mantra, the essence is to see all appearances as the body of the deity, to hear all sound as mantra, and to recognize all thoughts as the Dharmakaya. In this way, the 6 sense perceptions, the 5 poisonous emotions, and the 5 aggregates are transformed into their wisdom counterparts, and the body, speech, and mind are realized as the Vajra Mandala, the self-existing mandala of primordial purity. So we have the 6 sense perceptions. These are then the 5 senses and also mind. The 5 poisonous emotions are the 5 kleshas. We'll look at these, and also the 5 aggregates. So all of these, we're here today. We're going to cover the 6 sense perceptions and the 5 poisonous emotions. Next time we'll also do the 5 aggregates. But this is how to bring all of our perceptions onto the path, transformation of the senses, emotions, and aggregates. So first, to recognize as the deity, whatever forms appear is the crucial point of the development stage. Clinging to appearance as beautiful or ugly is liberated into its own nature. Free of clinging, mind as it appears is the body of Supreme Chenrezig. In the self-liberation of visual experiences, recite the 6-syllable mantra. So here we're looking at form. And when we look at form, the mind engages the medium of the body, even in our dreams and in the bardo. So we have all these experiences of our body right now. And with these, we have then linked to the body, we have all these conscious experiences. Here we are in the world. And so we have all of these sights, sounds, and so on. That's happening right now, yeah? This is our experience. But as far as the objects that we're experiencing goes, it's the mind that, as we saw before, essentially constructs this perception. And also it's on that basis we have likes and dislikes. And it's on the basis of that we have the kleshas, and it's from that we have then the karma, our patterning that begins. So this is where we lay down the hard wiring of who we are, and we're constructing ourselves for the future through this mind. And so it's important that we understand that to get to the bottom of this, which is essentially what drives our delusion, that we see that the good and the bad is not about the objects, it's about this mind and the perceiving mind. The likes and dislikes are not intrinsic to the objects themselves. Some slight imperfection here. Sorry, who knows, I might do this again, right? So. Yeah. A beautiful object has no intrinsic quality that is good for the mind, nor an ugly object an intrinsic power to harm it. Beautiful and ugly are just projections of the mind. The ability to cause happiness and suffering is not a property of the outer object itself. So of course we might say, well, I feel good when I'm with beautiful things, and I feel dreadful if I'm with ugly things. But the thing is, these qualities don't exist in the object itself. These are just our projections. And we try and notice how sometimes what appears initially beautiful then turns out to be not that useful, and so forth. We can see that what is that happens here. And the point is that we need to extract ourselves from this solidity around our assumptions. Now here, and this is where I don't really want to summarize it because it's just too profound actually, and Khyentse Rinpoche, having made this point, which is essentially, you could say, the view, then he clearly points to how we should practice this. And I don't really want to water this down or make a digest of that. I would just like to say, please read this, because here, somebody before was saying they aspire to understand this absolute nature of reality. This is where you read Rinpoche's instructions again and again and really take it to heart. It's so beautiful and so clear. And he shows what it is that drives samsara, what it is that drives nirvana, what it is that drives, you could say, bondage, and what it is that drives freedom. So Khyentse Rinpoche, he then ties this in with the practice of deity, mantra, and wisdom. So please read that again and again. So profound. Of course, all of it's very profound, but this particular point here is certainly made beautifully by Khyentse Rinpoche, and I didn't want to summarize that really. What we want to understand is there's not a single phenomena that ever extends beyond the nature of emptiness. Everything is ultimately ungraspable. And it is this nature of emptiness that allows for phenomena to appear. If things were just, if seed was not empty, then it could never become sprout. And so it's thanks to things being empty that phenomena move in this river, or this web of relationship. And so that's where we should understand that emptiness does not mean nothing. It just means that phenomena are not stuck. They're not anything that can be held. The more we understand that, the more, we could say, our interaction with reality becomes lively. That's where we become awake. We're kind of asleep. We're kind of not awake. We're limited. We have dense glasses that prevent us from seeing things. So seeing emptiness is to allow seeing greater. Like Nagarjuna says, for those for whom emptiness is possible, anything is possible. So we say, as much as phenomena are empty, and that's why we say, well, as soon as we establish emptiness, we also establish this inseparability of appearance and emptiness. That is the nature of mandala. So when we're talking mandala, pure perception, it's established with the same logic as emptiness. So the practitioner of Madhyamika and the practitioner of the Mahayana should never think that this pure perception business is something exclusively Vajrayana. It's the same reasoning that establishes emptiness that also establishes pure perception. Simply in that phenomena in and of themselves exist as the unity of appearance and emptiness. And that is how we understand deity. So recognizing this truth of purity is the heart of development stage practice. The thing we do with development stage practice is we sustain this understanding of the unity of appearance and emptiness, and we refer to it as purity. And that we sustain with the practice of the development stage practice. So that's as far as sound goes. Sorry, as far as forms go. Then sounds. And of course, apologies, I'm going over time. We are used to that by now, I think. To recognize sounds as mantra is the crucial point of recitation practice. Clinging to sound as pleasant or unpleasant is liberated into its own nature. Free of grasping, the spontaneous sound of samsara and nirvana is the voice of the 6 syllables. In the self-liberation of hearing, recite the 6-syllable mantra. So it applies that with form, as we had it with form, it's our perceptions. Once we begin to attribute solidity to whatever we're perceiving, in this case sound, we then have likes and dislikes, and we have the patterning. These are then what we call kleshas and karma. And that's where we need to again understand this: the perceived agreeable or disagreeable qualities are not found in the object itself. So we're continually operating, particularly modern people, much more than Asians actually. They're so sensitive to sound. People can't stand if there's, if they're meditating, there shouldn't be any sound, or if, I remember going to Bodh Gaya, and there was, just every hawker in Bodh Gaya plays the radio as loud as they can, and really so to the point where the membrane of the loudspeaker is tearing. That's really, that's how they like it, And so there you are in Bodh Gaya, in this serene place, and it's just full of all these sounds, And I remember once actually discussing this with a monk in one monastery, and he said, well, people have individual rights, He was like, yeah, people should be allowed to make sounds if they want to, And I remember staying in hotels where, all of a sudden the neighbors, they decide to have a party in the middle of the night, and they don't really see that it's a problem, And so the the immediacy of having this perception of what you're hearing as disagreeable or not is something that I think many are familiar with, particularly in the modern world. But that's again where we need to go beyond this, and we need to understand it's not, the problem doesn't lie in the object, it lies in our interpretation. And similarly also with when we are spoken to, insulted or praised, we should remember the Bodhisattva is not caught by praise or blame. So we aspire to that. Hearing all sounds as mantra is something that will help us. If we practice hearing all sounds as mantra, Rinpoche says we will be no more disturbed than a mountain is disturbed by the wind. So sounds are just conditions as anything else, and the essence of sound is intangible, it's emptiness. The heart of all this empty sound, the basic, you could say nada, the basic resounding of reality, is the sound of ah. And so we would say that is the basis for all pure sound and all mantra. And this is also then the basis for the Sanskrit alphabet. And it's on the basis of that then we have a science and a knowledge of the sacred quality of the uncorrupted sound, or the uncontaminated, diluted sound. So that's where the mantras arise from this original source. And that's also where we have the 6 syllables of the Om Mani Padme Hum mantra. Khyentse says, ordinary conversation, which is fundamentally the expressions of attachment and hatred, will only cause the wheel of delusion to spin faster and faster. But the recitation of mantra will protect your mind and lead you to realize the wisdom nature of speech. Therefore, recite the mani at all times until it becomes one with your breathing. And this is something that, please try this, because it works. However, you could say, however much we have a view or don't have a view, it's the strangest thing. Reciting mantra is something that clarifies the mind. So if we have the view, as we now have through studying this and seeing the value of this, there's all the more reason for applying this at all times without interruption. And you have sadhakas, who continually chant this. In the Indian traditions, you might have seen some of the swamis. They have a little bag, actually, because the mala is not supposed to be seen, that they are always doing their jap, their recitation. And so the value of practicing mantra. Smells, to recognize smells as unborn is the crucial point of the developments of the completion stage. Clinging to odor as fragrant or foul is liberated into its own nature. Free of grasping, all smells are the fragrant discipline of Supreme Chenrezig. In the self-liberation of smelling, recite the 6-syllable mantra. We would actually say that those who practice discipline well, they have a pleasant odor. This is something that's mentioned a few times here and there. Anyway, this is what's referred to here. So that's just a sort of a general, you could say general knowledge. But basically here again, it applies that just as with all the other perceptions, we realize the empty yet vivid, meaning manifest nature of smell. It's the unity of the appearance and its empty nature. So that's where, without distinction between scent and stench, we might have the scent of some perfume, we might have the stench of toilets, and yet we don't make any distinction, and we just consider all of it as being the unity of smell and emptiness, and we offer that up to the Buddhas. So in that way, we would say that the perception of smells are liberated into their own nature, and also we would say through such making offerings we accumulate merit. So then also it applies to flavors. To recognize flavors as a sacramental feast is the crucial point of offering. Attachment to taste as delicious or disgusting is liberated into its own nature. Free of grasping, food and drink are substances to delight Supreme Chenrezig. In the self-liberation of taste, recite the 6-syllable mantra. So again, the same thing applies. The likes and dislikes depend on our attitude. The mind that is realizing the empty nature of these labels, then the purity of flavor is known. So we sometimes have stories about masters who would test the students in terms of, letting them try to eat different things. And as a test of whether or not there is some experience of what we could call one taste, as they have the realization of emptiness. But with such an insight also, then whatever we partake, whatever we eat, whatever we drink, we could say they, with an understanding of this, integrating the experience of emptiness, of voidness, it then, whatever we partake, food and drink becomes a feast, becomes a Gana chakra. So that's where anything that we encounter in these terms becomes something that we are accumulating merit. Simply being free from any attachment is the supreme offering. So if we're eating without any kind of attachment, any kind of dualistic distinction and so forth, it becomes the supreme offering. What are preferences to different mantras? Well, we very often would say that the Indians, they would just practice one deity and they would have accomplishment. And the Tibetans, they humbly say, us Tibetans, we practice 100 deities and we have no accomplishment. Of course, this is just being, how do you say, humble. But we would say, just to focus on one practice, we needn't think in terms of distinguishing between mantras. We would say any mantra contains all the other mantras. And of course, this applies to this teaching here. When we're describing Chinrezi, everything is complete within that. Of course, you could then you could look at the other tantras. For example, Vajrasattva, they would say everything is contained within the Vajrasattva mantra. Everything is contained within the mantra of Guru Rinpoche, and so forth. So we do have, and then again, we do have sometimes different purposes. Some here, of course, there's emphasis on compassion, but also compassion is understood as inseparable from wisdom. Then we have certain practices and mantras that are for developing wisdom, long life, attracting, magnetizing, controlling. Some are for wrathful activity. So there is a number of different sadhanas and different practices. I am thinking of the Swamis yogis reciting various Sanskrit mantras and the various Tibetan Buddhist mantras, for instance. Can it be said that all ultimately clarify the mind when the intention is for liberation? Yeah, that's it. So we could consider that whatever mantra we're doing contains all the others. But of course, we will see practically also that there are many deities, there are many mantras, and like I was saying before, Tibetans, well, they like these many different practices. So we should have an open mind, but it basically means that we should be flexible. Yes, completely fine to just settle on to one mantra, and completely fine to also do all various different mantras and practices, different sadhanas. Now, sensation here means touch. And here it says, to recognize sensations as essential sameness is the crucial point of equal taste. Feelings of repletion and hunger, hot and cold, are liberated into their own nature. Free of grasping, all sensations and feelings are the deity's activity. In the self-liberation of sensation, recite the 6-syllable mantra. So, when we have this realization that we've been talking about here, the unity of appearance and emptiness, then of course also it applies to anything that we touch, which we know also we're very fussy about what we touch. We get very attached to a nice feeling. We don't like rough feelings and so forth. But when we have this nature, this realization of the nature, then regardless of what we're feeling, then there's an equal sense of joy. So for the yogi who undergoes pleasant feelings or rough feelings, it's all equally bolsters or enhances the experience of bliss and joy. Ken's Rinpoche says, to summarize, clinging to sense perceptions is what keeps you wandering in samsara. And this is why it is usually taught that you should abandon all pleasures of the senses. But if you have realized the void nature of illusory phenomena and are therefore truly free from clinging, all your sense perceptions can be brought to the path in order to increase your accumulation of merit and wisdom, and to bring progress to your meditative experiences and realization. So we would generally say that we should be cautious in terms of our entanglement with our sense perceptions and our attachments. But for the yogi that has realization, then the more there is of experiences of various sense perceptions, it enhances their practice. Just like we would say, if there's a fire, great fire, if there's a wind that blows on it, rather than actually extinguish the fire, it augments the fire even greater. So for someone like that, experiences in realization blazes. So then finally there's the sixth sense, if you like, the mind, which is not a sixth sense in a mystical sense, but it's more that it's also just like we perceive with the senses. Then also there's a place where we know what's happening in the mind, and there's a sense of the mind that actually is the experience of everything. So that mind is referred to as Tibetan. We actually the word for that is actually che, which means phenomena. And so here then, referring to the content of the mind, it says, to recognize all phenomena as void is the crucial point of view. Belief in true and false is liberated into its own nature. Free of grasping, everything there is, all of samsara and nirvana, is the continuum of the Dharmakaya. In the self-liberation of thoughts, recite the 6-syllable mantra. So, the general mind that perceives when we experience an object, then there's the mind that then is the seer of this, hearer of that, taster of this, toucher of that, and so on. And all of that is very much filtered through this mind that knows, and then the sense, the mind that then, the afflicted mind that says, I like this, I don't like that, and so forth. And this perpetuates this sense of self. And this self then, it operates with very much 3 aspects. That is, continually its concern is my body, my mind, happiness and all of that, and my name, how I'm perceived by the world. And when we're caught within that cycle of self-centering, this Atman or self, then this leads to increasing concern for us and less concern with other. So that's where there's more self-absorption and less concern with the other. The Bodhisattva, the sage, is free from this self-centering and has realized anatman, anatta. And from this point of view, then, not only realizing the void nature, but also there's spontaneously the releasing of the energy that normally is held back within the self-centering and the insecurity. So there is this warmth and this compassion that is its manifestation. And so here, then there's the recognition that ego is seen for what it is. There is no ego. It's a deluded fabrication. And that's where then we understand that there's no difference between self and other. There's no sense that the other is less important. So even when there are the appearances, the experiences of samsara, then the Bodhisattva never ever shrinks away from this realization of the nature of emptiness. So we would also say, as far as the appearances, just like ego never ever actually comes into existence, and ego never actually departs from the nature of emptiness, we would also say samsara never ever departs from the nature of emptiness. Just like in a dream, however solid it seems, it never ever parts from just being a figment of a dreaming subject. So truth and falsity, they're really just terms that we have in terms of this is, this doesn't, and so on and so forth. The nature, the ultimate nature, doesn't make any such assertions. And so this open space that goes beyond then truth and falsity, this is also this condition that is the ultimate kind of faith, really. That is the experience of the middle way. There's no attachment to any kind of spiritual dimension and no entanglement in a sort of a worldly dimension. We say the Bodhisattva has no attachment to nirvana, has no attachment to the spiritual peace, and as such has no qualms about working tirelessly for others. So now we're going to look at the 5 emotions, going slightly over time. Thank you for your patience. Khyentse Rinpoche says, to realize the perfect view is to be totally free from the 5 poisons, the emotions which keep us enslaved in samsara. As the 5 poisons disappear, the 5 corresponding wisdoms are revealed. So the actual nature of the 5 poisons is wisdom. It's only when we dramatize it, objectify this energy, and filter it through this narrow, stifling filter of our confusion, then we have this natural energy that turns into these toxic conditions of the mind. So, Paul Rinpoche says, don't follow after the object of hatred. Look at the angry mind. Anger, liberated by itself as it arises, is the clear void. The clear void is none other than mirror-like wisdom. In the self-liberation of hatred, recite the 6-syllable mantra. So this might sound strange, but actually I'd like to encourage you to read a chapter in Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism that's called Tantra, and that actually speaks a bit about how the moods of these, what we call the 5 families, are associated with these 5 emotions, and how the quality of what we call vajra, which is anger in its pure condition, possesses this clarity. And we will see there's references to these 5 wisdoms that arise when these toxic states are liberated in their natural condition. And actually that chapter in Cutting Through Spiritual Materialism is quite helpful in terms of us in the modern world. We kind of operate with this kind of, you could say, the mood. What's the mood like? And it gives us some handle on what's being spoken about. Anyway, as we have seen before, our attraction and repugnance, our likes and dislikes, has nothing to do with the object or even the simple perception itself. It's only when we begin to, you could say, weave and spin and ruminate on the basis of a perception, and we give it traction, that it then becomes the foundation for attraction and repugnance, likes and dislikes. Now in mantra, we would say these causes of samsara becomes the causes of wisdom, so that these arising of, let's say, anger, it becomes something that we don't entangle, and not being entangled in it, it actually provides this experience of clarity, and we would say becomes the causes of wisdom. In this case, we refer to it as the mirror-like wisdom. So we want to recognize the chain of deluded angry thoughts before they proliferate. This already, as ordinary persons, we have some intuitive understanding of how us ruminating and so on, getting stuck on things is not helpful. But particularly as practitioners of meditation, knowing not to follow after the thoughts, staying within this condition of simplicity is helpful. In terms of the anger itself, if we scrutinize it, we can again see there's nothing more than just, it only has as much reality as the thoughts that solidify it. When seen for what it is, not following after anger, anger is seen as mirror-like wisdom. When mistaken, if we follow after anger, it becomes the cause of hell. It becomes the cause of alienation with the other, the environment, and so forth, and continually struggling and fighting the outer world more and more sort of becomes antagonistic. We perpetuate this cycle. Now that that is the enemy. And that has caused lifetimes of sorrow. That's what we want to overcome. But it's not the kind of enemy that we can bash as we would somebody out there. This is about, again, applying this insight. And so when we become free of that, then we also see how others, they suffer unnecessarily, and we feel great compassion for beings. Rinpoche says, anger is the mortal enemy of liberation, since one moment of anger destroys virtue accumulated over eons. To eliminate anger is therefore one of the principal aims of a bodhisattva. So, strenuously maintaining the discipline of patience, recite the six-syllable mantra. As it is said, there is no greater wrong than anger, no greater discipline than patience. Again, reference to the 6th chapter of the Way of the Bodhisattva. It's such an amazing chapter in terms of seeing how we get it wrong when we justify our anger, and how it is possible to completely turn our perceptions around our anger, how it's possible to turn it around. What Buddha family is Manjushri? We generally say Buddha, the Buddha family. Yeah, so of the 5 families, this is the Buddha family. Yeah, Manjushri. But then you have Manjushri in all the 5 families also. Yeah. Don't chase after the object of pride. Look at the grasping mind. Self-importance, liberated by itself as it arises, is primordial voidness. The primordial voidness is none other than the wisdom of essential sameness. In the self-liberation of pride, recite the 6-syllable mantra. So in each of these, if we're looking at, I just thought to identify the structure of these 4 lines that we have for each of these 5 emotions, or destructive emotions, or whatever we choose to call them, the 5 kleshas. In each of the 5, we have first the direct instruction in the first line, right? Which actually tells us what to do, you know? Don't chase after the object of pride. Look at the grasping mind. So that's direct instruction in the first line, right? Then assessment of the true nature, the way the thing actually is in itself. That's what we have in the second. And then we talk about the wisdom aspect when it's no longer held by confusion. We would say it's pure aspect in the third line. And the manner then that we apply it in terms of uniting it with the practice of the 6-syllable mantra, the instruction there, which is pretty consistent with the first one and the others, is then the manner of practice in the 4th line. So this we have then repeated throughout these. And then we want to, Khenpo Rinpoche gives very practical instructions just to see the issue with pride, how barren pride is, how it's destructive. And he gives very simple instructions on how to apply common sense that rejects pride. So so there's some very common sense instructions there, but particularly then we want to see its empty nature, see then upon analysis, as anything else, pride dissipates. As for desire, it says, don't hanker after the object of desire. Look at the craving mind. Desire, liberated by itself as it arises, is bliss void. This bliss void is none other than all discriminating wisdom. In the self-liberation of desire, recite the 6-syllable mantra. Again, as we know, coming back to common sense instructions, nothing lasts, and it's useless to cling to anything. With the possessions that we obsess about, we never have any peace. And with all our obsessions and our busyness around these things that we want to attach ourselves to, or that we want to possess, our life runs out very quickly. Khenpo Rinpoche is never satisfied with what we have, always trying to get what we want. For countless lifetimes, we have completely worn ourselves out. Would it not be better to give it all up and instead learn how to be satisfied with just enough clothing to wear and just enough food to live on? So he instructs chanting the 6-syllable mantra, desire and attachment will naturally subside. And this applies with, of course, all the various kleshas. The all-discriminating wisdom of Chenrezig will naturally manifest. So our desire, when not being filtered or not held by ego and confusion, it transforms into this all-discriminating wisdom, also the wisdom that appreciates but doesn't have any grasping. It's the wisdom that sees the quality, the individual quality of things very clearly. So that's where we talk about all-discriminating wisdom. Jealousy. Don't follow after the object of jealousy. Look at the critical mind. Jealousy, liberated by itself as it arises, is void intellect. This void intellect is none other than all-accomplishing wisdom. In the self-liberation of jealousy, recite the 6-syllable mantra. So again, it applies. Jealousy is something that is in us. It's not in the object itself. So we need to recognize jealousy as it is, empty, the arising in the mind that has nothing about it that can be grasped. The object itself has nothing about it that possesses these qualities. And so being free, seeing it for what it is, we instead should turn this around and we should train in just feeling happy if there's somebody out there that has something that's wonderful. And then Khyentse Rinpoche gives us the story of Devadatta, which is a very sort of serious chapter, actually, a dark chapter in the early annals of Buddhism, which is Devadatta, who was Buddha's cousin, that was very competitive and did everything he could actually to compete with the Buddha. This had very serious consequences. Khyentse Rinpoche describes these. Khyentse Rinpoche says, just by feeling great joy in your heart at others' achievement, for example, at the vast offering someone might be making to the 3 jewels, you will be accumulating the same merit as that person. So if you see somebody doing something good, you rejoice in it. It's in a way empowering that same wealth in yourself. So we would say it's a little bit sort of the lazy man's shortcut to great merit. That if we have this joy in just regarding rejoicing in others, accumulation of merit, we gain the same merit. There's this story, I think it was in the Wish-Fulfilling Jewel of the Buddha, who was being offered a great meal by somebody, and at the end there was a beggar woman looking at this, and she just felt so happy about that. And at the end, then the Buddha proclaimed actually the greatest merit actually was achieved by not the person offering this great feast, but actually the beggar woman who was rejoicing in this. You can also see it. We can kind of intuit this, how there's something great when somebody's just happy for somebody else. It's very beautiful. Ignorance. Don't take for granted ideas forged by ignorance. Look at the nature of ignorance itself. The host of thoughts liberated by themselves as they arise are awareness void. This awareness void is none other than the wisdom of the absolute expanse. In the self-liberation of ignorance, recite the 6-syllable mantra. So our ignorance, that is indeed what gets us in trouble in the first place. It's what prevents us from recognizing that we have Buddha nature. So once we're caught up in the confusion, we live in this poverty of our confusion, and we're slaved to all our toxic impulses. And in doing so, we're blind and dumb to the nature of reality. We miss the truth of cause and effect of actions, which we can see. We fail to understand the nature of past and future lives. We tend to think in terms of something has an end and something has a beginning, but we actually don't understand the nature of consciousness. And we misunderstand the nature of the path. We don't really understand what leads to awakening, what leads to freedom, and what leads to further confusion. So ignorance keeps us deluded. and hence it's what creates all our suffering. And yet, if we shine the light on ignorance itself, if we look at this mind itself, this confused mind, then it also has nothing objectifiable, graspable, or any true existence. So realization of the absolute nature of ignorance, this is the wisdom of the absolute expanse. This is the ground of, you could say, everything. This is knowing reality for what it is. And this is associated also then with the Buddha family. So resting in that recognition is the heart essence of Chenrezig. This is the awakened condition that is the core of Chenrezig. So, summary here. When the 5 poisons arise, do not be carried away. Look at their nature. This will lead to the experience of wisdom. So if we generally view the 5 kleshas as the cause of suffering, yet if we're not confused by them, they actually lead to wisdom. They actually become the cause of liberation. So the absolute Chenrezig is the wisdom that knows emptiness. So this we have talked about to some extent then, what we arrive at through analysis and understanding the nature of things, this insight, that is then the absolute Chenrezig, knowing emptiness. And the relative Chenrezig is then from this nature, then there's this unbounded, unreserved, natural expression that benefits beings in countless ways. Apologies for going over time. Tricky times with anger arising globally for environmental reasons. Yes, but if we're going to be effective, we're not going to be effective if we're angry. So again, if we have the clarity that sees what needs to be done, that's anger that is infused with wisdom. So that's where we become clear-headed, and that's where we have this prajna that is enhanced actually by the anger. So that's where again, where if we're not caught by the anger, we become far more effective. If we lose our cool, becoming angry, then we're not very good at doing anything. It is very hard to see through these 5 poisons, true nature that lead to wisdom. Do you have any tips on this? Yes, the practice of the path. See, we can't pick up a book like this and then say, oh, now I'm going to read this and then I got it down. It doesn't work like that. In the teaching, we operate with first having an understanding. Then with that understanding, this becomes the foundation for our practice of the path. Nundra practice, whatever practice we're doing, sadhana, sitting practice, whatever we might do, we're practicing a path. So we have an understanding, and that understanding then gives way to experience, where we begin to have confidence in this. And once that confidence really takes hold of us, we practice more, and that then leads to complete realization. So it's true, it is hard to see through these 5 poisons, but it's what we need to do. And so it's not only about us wanting to be sort of better, but it's also us no longer being caught in the suffering of samsara, and also understanding how others suffer being caught by this. So there's every reason then for us to engage in the path with an understanding then of the you could say the magnitude of this project. So it is hard, but it's something that needs to be done. So yeah, a lot of anger is happening, and the anger itself could become, you could say, could be created, but it could also become, it could become toxic. That's where we have sometimes these polarized positions that are not very helpful. Yeah? All right. Thank you. Shall see you next time. Same time, same place. next week. Please, next week will be the last, so please read the rest of the book. By this positive action, may all beings perfect the accumulation of merit and wisdom, and attain the two supreme kayas which arise from merit and wisdom.